listening to Filling the Storehouse podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Stuart. And we want to walk with you on the journey to living the abundant life through faith, family, and freedom. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours. Together, achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to intentionally fill our storehouse. Storehouse listeners, what's up? This is Stu. Hey, before we get into this episode, I have one favor to ask of you. Go find our Facebook group. It's called Filling the Storehouse Podcast Facebook group, and join us. We're trying to grow the community, grow the tribe, to promote abundance and service and giving, and just share lots of cool stuff with you. We post clips from our podcast episodes, good books we're reading, information on our guests, previous guests, blog posts, just some cool, funny pictures, just lots of good stuff going on in our Facebook group. So we'd love for you to join us and tell someone else about us. We'd really greatly appreciate it. And go fill your storehouse. Make it a great day. See you.
All right. Well, I think, John, I think this is number 3 podcast that you've been on with us. I think you have the record. I think you are the top guest on our podcast now.
I've got a backpack. I'm actually moving in this weekend. I know you didn't know that.
Hey, I got a basement. I got a bedroom. I got a bathroom. We're good to go.
Chain me to a post in the basement. Give me a typewriter. I'm good to go.
Perfect.
Well, Stu, you've been a guest most on our podcast, because normally you're just like along for the ride. So I think you, never mind. That's just rude.
I know
you're an amazing
podcast
host.
Thanks,
Stuart.
Man. Appreciate it.
I love it.
Yeah,
John, we're
lifting me up. Thanks for lifting me up.
You're welcome, buddy. John, we're super excited to have you for the third time. Before we hit record, we had some already rich conversation. I'm looking forward to some of the answers to these questions that are very applicable. And I think, we'll come kind of full circle and how a fiction book and author who also wrote the Go Giver series, like how these things come together and can make us, better even in anything we do, whether it's speaking, business, and the things that we can consider. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm very excited about it, actually. So thank you for joining us again, John.
Hey, my pleasure. I mean, I told you, my wife she told me she's jealous. She's out shopping right, and I'm jealous because you're going to talk to the guys and I'm not today. So I'll tell her we had a lousy time. It was no good.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Fun.
No laughter. Fun. It's terrible. Stu, you got any dad fails recently? Or any dad stories?
Man, let's see. I was trying to get my kid. This was actually last week prior to you and I going on our little trip. Don't do this. So if you're trying to get your kids buckled into the car seat, and let's just say you have a 4-year-old son who is really, really stubborn. Hypothetically. And if he doesn't want to listen to you, and you're like, the car is on and you're like ready to go and he won't get strapped in.
Oh,
hypothetically, you might hit the gas just to like show like what happens when you don't get strapped into your car seat.
Good strategy. Yeah.
He goes flying forward into the back of the seat. Hypothetically.
Yeah. If you did that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Hashtag dad fail.
Yeah.
I'll remember this.
That is a dad fail. That's
just saying.
Thank you for that, Stu. I will keep that in my mind as I ponder having my kids sit into their seat to not hit the gas while they're not buckled in, because something could potentially go wrong there. So
yeah,
that's great. No, that's brilliant insight.
All just a hypothetical situation.
If we have any police officers listening, this is 1000% hypothetical.
Never
happened. Would never happen. Would never have. It's fiction. We're talking about fiction here.
We're talking about fiction today.
We're talking about fiction today, and he just made that hypothetical up. And I mean, we're very responsible adults, guys. So come on, like if you thought that we would really do something that stupid, that's your fault as a listener.
That's right. It's on you guys. It's on you guys.
Okay, so let's change subjects here, because that was just all hypothetical. Let's get on to this super cool book that's in the background here called Cold Fear.
Yeah.
John, give us the background. Where did this come from? Because
Well,
you're a nonfiction writer only, right?
yeah, I mean, well, I've published over 30 books, and almost all but two, have been nonfiction. It's yeah. So this is new. It's like a whole new career for me, a whole new track to run on, and it's this is the second book in the series, Cold Fear. The first book, as your audience knows, is called Steel Fear. Came out a year ago, and it is a series that has a hero, a very troubled, traumatized, and now fugitive from the law U.S. Navy SEAL named Finn, no last name, or if he has a last name, he doesn't know what it is. He's forgotten. He literally doesn't know. So Finn X, he calls himself. And Steel Fear, Steel Fear took place in an aircraft carrier, and Finn had been dropped onto this aircraft carrier for reasons that nobody on the carrier knew, and he wasn't too clear on himself, and ended up stalking a serial killer in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was a locked room mystery, the locked room being an aircraft carrier with 6,000 souls on board. And we talked about that book. That book was fun. So the big question was, for Brandon, my co-author, the Webb on the cover, Brandon Webb, who is a former Navy SEAL. The big question for Brandon and myself was, okay, where do we go now? It's like, where do you go from an aircraft carrier? Because a big part of Steel Fear was the environment, was the carrier. Such a weird environment. I mean, weird in the sense of so foreign, so unfamiliar to most people. So a big part of that book was painting the environment in such a way, so vividly, that you, the reader, felt like you're there. Like you could imagine completely what it felt like. You could smell it, you could taste it, you could feel it rock. You knew, well, it didn't rock. You could feel it, right? And at the same time, if you were in the Navy, or if you'd been there and you knew carriers, you'd go, yeah, they got it right. So that was the challenge of that. So where do you go next? Submarine, plane, helicopter, spaceship.
Iceland?
So we went to Iceland. That's where we are. That's where we are today. So that's Cold Fear is what happens to Finn next, after he escapes basically the USS Abraham Lincoln. And it's a few months later, and he shows up in Iceland in the middle of winter. It takes place during the week between Christmas and New Year's. And Finn arrives in Reykjavik, capital of Iceland, looking for three someones, looking for three former teammates. What he's really looking for is answers to what has happened to him and who killed the man who, if he had any friends, would have been his best friend, Lieutenant Kennedy. So that's the deal. He arrives in Reykjavik, and the night he arrives, this young girl, for reasons nobody understands, runs down the street barefoot, slips into the corner of a pond under the ice sheet, and drowns herself. And of course, Finn, newly arrived in town, soon becomes the prime suspect. So that's the engine that starts off Cold Fear.
Yeah. And let me, that, while very succinct and a great summary, I'll tell you the first book and this one now. So at the time, about a year ago when we got it, and this one now that I'm reading it in kind of in the middle of it. Warning, disclaimer: you cannot hold this podcast responsible for your lack of sleep. If you're a nighttime reader, I'll tell you, I love it, and that's what's so intriguing. We'll get into this conversation, but I love, I just love what it does to my brain and gets things going. And I'm a nighttime. A lot of times I read before I go to bed, and I was telling you last night I woke up around 11:30 midnight to I didn't realize what time it was until my Kindle hit me in the face, and I was like, oh, I probably should close this and go to bed now.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize.
It's so good. They're so good. And I'll tell you, as I'm reading it, because I know you, and we've had you on before and read your other books, the Go Giver series that we talk about often. It also is intriguing to me how you made this shift. Like it seems, because the detail and the twists and the turns are so, I mean, they're so well thought out and they're so creative. And I think that's where it really hits me. It's so creative that I just don't understand how you go from one skill set to the other. And it seems to me, it's so seamless to me. I know for you, I'm sure there's tons of effort and tons of struggle, but but how do you do that with your mind? And how are you able to, and why? I guess I would also ask why. I'm curious why go from this wildly successful model and now go into this completely different thing, totally different genre, but also it seems like a huge challenge to me.
Yeah. I mean, it is. You're absolutely right. It is. It's crazy. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Go Giver that Dave keeps referring to is the Go Giver series of books. They call them business parables. So basically, they're short stories in essence, like 100 pages, 120 pages. You can literally read one in an evening, or certainly in a week, in an easy weekend. They're short, pretty simple stories that are told to illustrate a point, like parables in the Bible or like Aesop's fables. They're stories that are told to kind of illustrate some principles of living. And so in a way, they're like miniature novels, but the deal with parables is they're super simplified. So like the hero in the Go Giver books, you don't know what color their hair is, what color their eyes are. You don't know anything about their parents. You don't know anything about their childhood. It's like you don't get any details. You don't even know exactly where they take place. There's not a lot of detail because that isn't the point. The point is a really simple story to illustrate the point. But in order to drive the point home, in order for you, the reader, to take away something that you learn and internalize and that improves your life, that changes your life, you've got to be drawn into the story. The stories are simple, but they got to grab you. You've got to care about them. You've got to care about the characters and what happens to them, so that you, like you with the novel last night, so you can't put it down, because you really have to know what happens to this guy Ben, or this guy Joe, or this woman Jillian, or whatever. So I think here's the whole question of transition from these simple parables and also all the nonfictions that I've, memoirs and the how-to books and stuff that are straight nonfiction. The transition from those to novels, it's like you have to get really clear on what's different and what's the same. And so what's different in a novel is you're going to go into lots of rich detail. You're going to have lots of character traits and background. It's, as you say, the description of the aircraft carrier or the description of Reykjavik has got to be super detailed, so that you feel like you're there, so that you feel like you're in a movie, as opposed to being like in a black and white drawing, right? So that's different, spelling out all the detail. And for that, it's like with Cold Fear, I read a ton about Iceland. I read a ton of novels that are set in Iceland. I watched documentaries about Iceland. You just steep yourself in the subject as much as you can, absorb it. So that's different. What's the same is that it's a story. And the story only works if you care about the characters. Ultimately, it's a story about, it's the number one tool kit of a novelist isn't prose description. Like, some novelists write beautiful, flowery descriptions, like James Lee Burke, if you know that novelist who writes the Dave Robichaux novels, are set in Louisiana. And he just writes this prose that's like, oh my God, it's poetry. It's amazing. It's florid descriptions of Louisiana. And then you got novelists who just are very bare bones, like Lee Child, Jack Reacher, just like boom, 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 boom. So description, that's lovely, but it's not your prime toolkit. Prime toolkit isn't even plot. Like, who's the guy who writes Alex Cross? Jim Patterson. He's really a genius with plot, but his style is like dirt simple writing. But no, your primary toolkit as a writer is empathy, is getting inside the character, is understanding the character. It's probably your prime tool as a leader in actual life as well. It is putting yourself in the shoes of the people that you're dealing with. Anyway, that's I think that's so in a way, writing a 400-page novel and writing a 100-page parable, they're worlds apart, but there's something about them that's really similar, which is that I have to kind of spin my wheels with this idea for a story until I kind of, my gears click with this character. And then the characters kind of write the story. The characters are what determine, what happens in either case.
That's really interesting that you equated that to a leader and using empathy. I never thought about that before. It's really cool. And, it's interesting. I have rarely chosen to read fiction books. I've typically always been just, I'm going to read self-help books. I'm going to read the nonfiction business books, Christian books, leadership books, all just kind of focused around making me what I think to be, better, right?
Building your character and building your humanity and, building your life skills.
I actually heard someone say this weekend, David and I were at a mastermind retreat, and someone said, I'm a self-helpologist. And I was like, yeah, that's me. I'm a self-helpologist.
Yeah.
And, but David, he, he's an English background, in college, and he does read a lot more, fiction books. And he tells me, like, he's like, yeah, it really helps me open up my brain. And so I'm just curious, from someone who's written only a few now, I'm curious if there is benefits, as a business guy, an entrepreneur, as a self-helpologist, to choose to read more fiction books. And I'm just kind of curious, what you think towards that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing for me is that reading is like eating. There is junk, and there is okay food, and there is great nourishment. There is really just fabulous, farm fresh, amazing, nutritious, wholesome food.
I love
and
that.
by wholesome, and so be careful what you feed your brain. By wholesome, I don't mean that it's everybody's smiling and everybody's happy and it's all squeaky clean. By wholesome, I mean that it's rich, high quality writing. So whether it's fiction or nonfiction or self-help or romance or science fiction or anything, first of all, I say go for the best. Just look for the ripest, freshest, farm fresh fruit and vegetables and the grass-fed beef and whatever it is you're going to eat. Get the best. But then, I got this. I was just saying before we hit record that Brandon and I got this questionnaire from a thing we're doing for the Jack Carr organization, which was like 10 questions that we were both answering. And one of the questions really caught me. It said, do you think your books more reflect reality or are really meant as an escape from reality? And I'm like, I have never subscribed to that idea that novels are give people an escape from reality. I don't, that's not my thought at all. To me, a good novel, even more a great novel, helps you connect with your reality, helps you contact reality, teaches you more about reality, engages you more in the real world. Because novels, when I was a kid, I read a book called Born Free, right? Later became a famous movie and a famous song and all. But when the book came out, it was a book about this woman, Joy Adamson, who lived with these lions in the African bush, right? Famous book. And I read the whole book, and at the end of the book, so in a little afterward, the lion died. And I remember reading that. And then around the same time, this summer, I was 7 years old, I read Old Yeller, right? At the end of Old Yeller, Travis, whatever his name is, has to shoot the dog because he might have rabies. He was bitten by a rabbit, something. And so he shoots the dog. And man, when he shot the dog, I was a mess. I was crying and I was upset. And I was like, oh my God.
I still am when you read that book as an adult.
Yeah, it just crushed me, man. And I remember sitting there crying and thinking, this makes no sense. I know this is a story. I know it didn't really happen. There was no Travis. There was no Yeller. It's made up. It's fiction. And I just read Born Free. And that lion really existed and it really died. And when I read it, I was like, it didn't move me at all. And I went to my mom and I asked her, what is going on? Why am I so upset about this dog dying when I know it didn't really happen? And she said, good stories, it isn't about whether they're real or not. They're realer than real. And that made somehow sense to me. And I still think that's true. Good fiction kind of transcends the details of what did or didn't happen and takes you kind of to the heart of the human experience of it. And the human experience of it is really real. It's very real. Case in point, Steel Fear, to me, is really a book about leadership. And the lessons about leadership in that book, I mean, first of all, it does so happen that they're loosely based on real experiences that Brandon had. So we kind of drew from those. And I've been studying leadership my whole life. So I drew from my own experiences of good and bad leadership. So you read this novel that's fiction that didn't really happen, but there's great content in there about what it looks like to be a genuinely fantastic leader, what it looks like to be a mediocre leader, and what it looks like to be a really terrible leader. And this new book, Cold Fear, is about friendship in a way. It's about friendship and betrayal. And it has examples of humanity in there about what does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be loyal to another person? What does it mean to be betrayed? What does it mean to betray? And I think those things, we take them. And at the same time, when you read a hero like Jack Reacher, or you read, any hero in any piece of fiction who solves a mystery or transcends a difficulty or catches a criminal or solves a huge problem, it kind of feeds that part of you that says, now, if I were in that situation, what would I do? And we all face villains in our lives. We all face catastrophes and problems and challenges. And when we've read what a great hero on the page, how they solve that, how they deal with that, how they handle that tragedy, it gives us tools. It builds our toolkit. That's what I believe.
I love it.
Yeah, that's, just a suggestion for a topic for your next fiction book would be how to rid yourself of a business partner, potentially, I don't know, or a best friend, like how to work through the process of getting rid of that.
This could be a real life challenge, just hypothetically. For example.
Again, hypothetical.
Right.
We make stuff up.
I when I was through high school and in college, in high school, because you have your required readings and your writing, which I when I look back, I wish I would have embraced how much I loved it more, because I would have practiced the art of writing and putting things down more, and I would be more proficient now. But excuse me, but in college, you have the specific readings and offerings from the course that to meet your requirements, but they're
your
usually
goal,
right, but they're really good. Like a lot of the books you're exposed to are really good. And then as I left that, I had sort of gotten away from fiction completely and was diving into these books. And then, I went back, and Ken Follett was the author I was trying to remember.
Ken Follett, right.
His name. And I read, Pillars of the Earth, and now there's additional series, and these books are huge, thick, Bible thick books. But I'll tell you, for weeks on end, I cannot put them down in the gaps of time that I'm reading. But my emotional response to these books is real, and it's significant, but it also forces you, and it also either validates or makes you really consider, oh, wow, because there's points in there where you're like, well, what would I do? Especially if it's at the end of the chapter, you have to close the book, and well, what would I do? Like that guy is and Still Fear is a great example, because if I remember correctly, the CEO, I don't want to ruin anything for anybody, but there were leadership challenges from the upper echelon of leadership within that book. And it hit very close to home for me, because I was like, well, I'm currently a CO. I was an XO, and I have a CMC, and you look at those dynamics, and you kind of play scenarios through your head, and it makes you question yourself on what kind of leader you are. And I don't think nonfiction can do it in the same way. And so I think there's an element of diving into these books that so I've really gone, I still read a lot of the other types of books, but I've really intentionally, and then I have great opportunities like this where, we get and read a book of someone we know and love and trust and admire, but it really, it just completely activates the totally separate, self-help books do not keep me up at night. I'm just being honest.
Yes.
Like I'm not like, oh, this is a page turner, And the joy of reading, I think sometimes when we're reading these books to check blocks and be like, okay, today I read how to be a better dad, a better leader. It's not the same.
And I just want to say, first quick note, the thing about the prose, I mean, I don't want to discount the value of prose because, once I've kind of got a story figured out, what I'll do is a first draft, or I'll be roughing out ideas for a story, and I'll just write stuff down that I pray to God nobody ever reads because it's just not, it's just not interesting at all. And then I'll later go back and start to rework it and find more interesting ways of saying this and saying that, and then I'll brainstorm that, and then try to make the texture of it as rich and as interesting and as gripping as possible. But so the pros and the skills of that, which words do you choose? How long do you make the sentence? Do you break the sentence in half, or do you make one long sentence? Where's the paragraph break? When does it go fast? When does it go slow? When do you have action? When do you have reflection? All these kinds of variations of pace and style, they're important. But here's the thing: what's really happening with a novel is it's like, these virtual reality suits where you strap on this suit and you have a helmet and you're moving, and what you're seeing and experiencing is this whole scenario, which isn't really there, but it feels like the. That's what a novel is. What I do when I write Cold Fear, what I'm doing is I kind of put together, crash together a story outline and some ideas, and then I strap them on. And then I kind of play it out, like, what would Finn do? I'm doing this right now with book 3, which won't be out until next summer. Finn is investigating the disappearance of somebody, and he goes into a strange city that he is not familiar with. And how does he investigate it? And he has to stay hidden. He's a fugitive from the law right now. So I spent the last 4 or 5 days walking around thinking, how would I do this? It's me putting on a Finn suit and trying to figure out how to operate this story that I'm in. Well, when you, the reader, read that, you put the suit on and you're doing the same thing I did. You're just following I happen to be the first player of this game, but now you're the next player. You're putting it on. And by the way you play it is a little different than the way I played it. Because even though my words are on the page, you're reading them from your experience and your memories and your sensation of life that you've had up to this point. So that's what you're really putting on Jack Reacher, or you're putting on Philip Marlowe, or you're putting on, whoever the character is, and you're walking through the story. And when you take the story off, when you finish the game and you take the story off and you put it back in its kit, you're a little different. You've had this somewhat transforming experience. That is the hope.
Well, and I think it really was formative to me to hear people like Admiral Stavridis and General Mattis talk about, and even what's his name, Warren Buffett, like these very influential people at the top of their game within their industries, for them to talk about not only how much they read, but what they read, and the fact that those guys and those gals, they incorporate in fiction very, very intentionally to really, whether it's to help creativity, to put themselves in. Mattis said that when he puts himself in a book, I think it was Mattis or maybe it was Stavridis, I can't remember, but one of them said when they put themselves into the book, in the scenario, it helps them to work through a thought process that they've never been in a military situation that they felt unprepared for. And
that's really interesting.
Really
I love
powerful. That. Yeah, it was very insightful. And so when you apply that to business, when you apply that to, there's so many ways that you can apply that, your own family life. Like, I think we miss out in being this generation of, especially high achievers, but this generation of self-help junkies. I think we rob ourselves of the richness of storytelling and also practical application of going through the exercise of putting ourselves into a story and wearing it and carrying it. And what would we do in that scenario?
I think that the nonfiction stuff is supremely valuable. You read something by Malcolm Gladwell or by Covey or by somebody who's got some really great things to say and observations, and it's super valuable. What I think that a story does is it helps you take that knowledge and integrate it, make it part of how you actually behave. Because it's really easy to go to a seminar or a weekend workshop or to read a book close the covers of the book, fly home from the seminar, and now you're the same old person. You haven't integrated that stuff. It hasn't become part of your life. You can make notes in your daily planner, say, I want to make sure to do this and this and this, but it still doesn't really stick to you. It's like, it's like eating a mineral supplement and your body doesn't absorb any of it. Stories help you absorb knowledge. Stories help you absorb wisdom. In the Finn books, I try to do two things. I try to have two different stories going, two different threads going. There is what you'd call the procedural, because I think this reflects our lives. There's the procedural aspect, which people love, and it's fascinating, it's interesting. It's like watching CSI or something, where somebody has to figure out a mystery. You've got to follow clues and unwrap something. And usually, so far in all the Finn books, there's only several different procedurals going on. In book one, the CMC, Jackson was trying to figure out these murders, and at the same time, Finn is trying to figure out some. So there's different procedurals going on, which is trying to figure out what's going on and what to do about it in the external world of our lives, right? At the same time as there's this internal journey happening for Finn, there's this sort of internal quest. It's almost like an internal procedural, but it's like Finn is also, he is a troubled dude. He has holes in his memory, which is, he's largely valued for his memory in the military. He's supposed to be a professional observer and analyst and reporter of, I think that's what a sniper does. It's an intelligence asset first and foremost. And he's got these big gaps in his memory. He has these huge holes in his childhood memory. He has tremendous trauma in his history, both childhood and recent adulthood. And he's got some big gaps in his personality. This is a challenged dude. And, I don't want to give anything away. That's why I'm stammering. In Steel Fear, he comes to some pretty startling memory realizations at the end of the book. It happens in Cold Fear too. He is on a quest.
Don't tell us about Cold Fear.
All I'm going to say is he's on a quest to understand himself, his own past, unwrap the mystery of himself. And I think that all of us, to a greater or lesser degree, are trying to figure out how to negotiate our world. And we're also trying to unwrap the mystery of ourselves, because every one of us has some level of mystery to ourselves. It's like, what makes me tick? What makes me act the way that I act? What makes me make the decisions that I make? Some of them that seem good and some of them that seem not so good. What is this thing here? Why was I put here? Why was I designed? What was I created for? All that kind of stuff that can sound kind of airy-fairy and like existential, blah, blah, blah. But man, it's meaningful stuff. It's like, what am I doing here? We talk about this in relation to the marriage book. If you really want to work in a marriage, the way you work in a marriage is you work on yourself. Warren Bennis said the real challenge of leadership, I forget the way he says it, and I put it in the book that Dan Rockwell and I did. The journey of leadership, paraphrased, is the journey of discovering yourself. He says it really is that simple, and it really is that difficult. So whether you talk about leadership or marriage or whatever domain, this internal journey is a very big deal. So when you strap on the game that is Cold Fear or Steel Fear and play through the different scenarios, the chapters, there's this external challenge you're trying to solve, and there's also these internal challenges you're trying to solve. And for me as a writer, that's just such a joy to work out. And that's what I love as a reader. I write what I love to read, basically.
That's good. I love it. So David and I, we were recently asked to speak on a stage, and it'll be a pretty large crowd, and we've all been speakers in some form or fashion in our military careers, and doing the podcasts and webinars and things like that. And we have a story, and I think it's an interesting story to people, and I think everybody has a story. And I'm curious, how do you take a story that could be valuable to somebody and get to where you produce that in a book or on a stage or in a webinar or a podcast? Like, where do you start with your own story? What do you put yourself in a certain surrounding? Where do you start? How do you get creative? What's your routine? How does a couple knuckleheads like us take a story that we think might be valuable and actually like put it out there to the world?
Yeah. I mean, well, story is I think is so key. When, let's say you're giving a talk.
Yeah.
The same thing applies, by the way, if you're writing a blog. So for years I wrote a blog, and the blog post always, for me, had to start with a story. And sometimes I knew I had, and this would be the exact same thing for a talk, because I used to give a lot of talks. Sometimes I would have an idea that I knew I wanted to, the talk was going to be about this particular idea. And I knew I needed to find a story that illustrated that. Sometimes I would just be kicking around, thinking nothing in particular, kind of knowing I had to come up with something, and a story would come to mind, something I'd experienced. And the story would suggest the idea. It could kind of go both ways. An idea looking for a story, or a story, and then that gives you an idea. But to me, the art of public speaking is taking a story, explaining some of the meaning of that, and then telling another story, explaining the meaning of that, and then wrapping it up with another story. It's like a necklace, and the pearls are stories, and the string is the point you're trying to make.
Oh, that's good.
And when I was doing a lot of speaking, I made two challenges for myself. One was start every talk differently. It was just a personal challenge. Never tell the same story twice. Now, I say this with some caution, because a lot of people have a certain story that they tell, and they refine it, and they say it over and over and over again, and gets better and better. And that's fine to do. I'm not saying you can't ever repeat yourself, but that was my personal challenge. Never tell the same story, which meant that every time I gave a talk, I'd be standing there like 15 minutes before the talk's going to start, just thinking about, like, what do I do now? What do I do? And I would come up with something fresh. And so that I knew that would always keep my talks fresh. But to me, the little story, the vignette you tell is like what kicks it off. I mean, you could say, I discovered after 20 years in the corporate world that it was really important to have work-life balance. Or you could say, it was a Tuesday, and I looked at my kid, and I suddenly realized, oh my Lord, I'm watching my kid grow up on videotape. Because I was never there for his birthdays. I was never there for his soccer games. And from that Tuesday on, I swore to myself, I'm going to be there for my kid. Now, I just said the same thing two different ways. Which way are they going to remember? It's the story. It's the vignette. It's when you put a human face on it. So I think it's really, really key. And you asked about, like, what's the routine? How do you get that? How do you start that going? I mean, for me, I have two ways that I write. One of them is sitting at my desk with my laptop. But the way that I come up with something that I start is I have to get away from my laptop, go sit in the cozy chair in the corner of my office, and sit there with a cup of tea or a cup of water or nothing at all, in a blank pad of paper, and know that I have an hour free or 2 hours free. Or, if circumstances are different, maybe I just have 20 minutes free, but I got a little free unstructured time and a blank pad of paper. And I just kind of think about the readership or the audience, and start asking myself questions like, what do they want to know? What do I know that could possibly be of any value to them? What is it people are hungry for? What has ever happened to me that I would want to share with them? Just asking questions like, what's the first thing I remember about my parents? What's the first thing I remember about school? Who was my favorite teacher? Just kind of interviewing myself until a question suddenly trips a story, or trips an idea, trips a thought. Obviously, if you've got a given topic, then questions are all around that topic. But to me, starting with a blank slate and just gently peppering myself with questions soon a fish jumps out of the surface of that pond, and then boom, okay, we got a place to start.
That's good.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've committed more to, and really more on my plate from the perspective of Stu and I and the efforts we're doing to, some of the new things that we're looking at starting, really putting our time into this mastermind that we're starting. And one of the things that I've signed up for, because I love it, but two, I think it's very applicable, is writing, is doing, starting with blogs. And so just hearing you say your process is really a golden nugget for me, because I'll sit down and but like giving yourself the permission to turn everything off, and it's being very unstructured, and then just start asking yourself questions, start writing. Cause I think, my style and what I've currently got, a Word document, if anybody looked at it, they'd be like, what in the world? You got like 17 different starts to things. But that's the way that, I'm a squirrel kind of guy anyway. So then a thought will come in and be like, oh, this would be a good topic. So I'll write down 2 sentences, and then I'll think of something else, and then go back and develop those out later. Because knowing, like you said, that as things come out, there's probably some good, there's some good thought there that would potentially be beneficial. But even like asking, I like the idea of asking a bunch of questions, like interview yourself, and then just maybe one sentencers, just a whole page of one sentencers, and then go back. And before you know it, you've got 15, 20 blog posts that you're putting out there. And again, it's not to put out there. It's important questions, right? Like value add, like what, I love what you said. What do people, you look at your surroundings, like, what do people want? Like, what do people want? What people need? Like, what kind of message and what do they not need? And I think that's really, that's awesome. And one question I had for you is, I feel like a lot of times I'll go back to the stuff I've read, the more creative stuff, and also the nonfiction stuff, draw a lot from that. But I'll go back to a lot of that stuff to create the content that writing is filled with. And so in my mind, to create a good story, well, step one is read a lot, because it'll help you bring a lot together. And I think that really is another, that question. And I'm curious if that's part of your life. I think I know the answer, but it really, just that question also motivates me to read way more than when people post things and say, oh, I want to read 500 books this year. Like, that's awesome. But that's just like to me, that's kind of, that's just a check in the block. But when you ask yourself, how do I create a better story? Like I feel hungry for content right now.
Yeah. I've had people ask me, do you read for work or do you read for enjoyment? And I'm like, wait, those are different.
Yeah. Yes.
Somebody didn't tell me that. I never heard about
awesome.
it. So I'll give you an example of, and I totally agree. Great writing starts with great reading. Good writing starts with good reading. And if you're really curious, mediocre writing also starts with mediocre reading. So here's an example for me. In Cold Fear, there's a villain named Boone, and I won't do a lot of spoilers, don't worry. But there is this villain. This guy is like seriously deranged guy. His name is Boone. And I was writing Boone, and I'd written a couple of scenes, and it just weren't working. I mean, it was like he was a little bit too cartoony. It was kind of smarmy, and it was just kind of smart alecky, and it was just every tone I struck, it just felt like a false note. It just didn't feel engaging to me on the page. And so rather than trying harder, which usually almost never works, rather than trying harder and pushing my pen at it, I put it aside. I said, what do I read? So I picked up a copy of No Country for Old Men. I had never read this book. I saw
that is a scary guy right there.
That is like the scariest villain I have ever read in my life.
It's terrible, yeah. Awesome.
He is terrifying, man, this guy. Anton Chigurh. And so I read.
I was trying to remember. I knew it was a CH. Yeah. I'm like, what is his name? Chandra
Chigurh.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that even mean? It's like a chigger. He's like a chigger. This guy is like a force of, literally like a force of nature. He's like the grim reaper of the Southwest. And so I read the book. And of course, I'd seen Javier Bardem do the role in the movie, which was also terrifying. But in the book, it's even more terrifying. after I read the book, I was like, and now I kind of like knew how to write Boone. And Boone isn't like Anton Chigurh. It isn't like, oh, he did that, and so I'll do that. It's more like it just blew fresh air into my corners of my brain, and it gave me a feeling for how to write him. Or said better, it didn't give me a feeling for how to write him. It sparked him to life in my head. So I think that's what great reading does for you. Whether you're going to write something, or whether you're going to give a talk, as you're saying, reading the great stuff. I mean, who will ever forget the sentence, if you want to change the world, make your bed, right? Like a whole book follows that.
Yeah.
But the whole book will stick in your head because of that. That's the power of words.
I'm just curious. This actually just came to mind. Dave and I, like I said earlier, we just got back from kind of like a mastermind event where we all get together with like-minded people and that are trying to grow their businesses and in their life. And I'm curious. We always tell people, hey, surround yourself with like-minded individuals and people that will help you grow. Is there like a author mastermind? Like, do you go and surround yourself with other authors that will like help you, get creative and throw ideas at each other? And, do you have a large friend base of just other, professional authors, and you just kind of go mastermind with each other?
Well, the first thing is I have this co-author. For the Finn books, which is Brandon Webb, and the way that I work with Brandon is kind of like we have this little mastermind of two. For the Finn books, and the way that I work with Brandon is really interesting. People would naturally assume that what Brandon brings to the table is this military experience, and he feeds all the military details. Actually, Cold Fear doesn't have much of a military aspect to it at all. It really all takes place in civilian world, so they really aren't military books. And in fact, the military background isn't primarily what Brandon brings to the table. What he brings to the table is he has a really creative mind and this really classic Navy SEAL problem-solving capacity. SEALs are just tend to be really ingenious in their capacity to solve unusual and difficult problems in extraordinary circumstances. Probably their whole job description in the military could be defined as, problem solver at large. And so we'll brainstorm plot issues or plot thread story points or whatever, and that's. He'll spit out all kinds of suggestions, and it isn't like I take every single one of them, but I'll take something. I'll get this or that or this or that's great. I do have writer friends that I connect with, and I have, mainly what I have is I have a couple of writers that when I've written a first draft of something, I'll bounce it off them, and cool. Or sometimes if I'm having a challenge, I'll kind of just bounce that off them. Yeah. What's happening with the crime novels, with the Finn books, is that I'm starting to get to know other crime writers, which is really, really fun for me, because in a way I'm sort of collecting a circle of writer friends more so now in the fiction world than I ever did in the nonfiction world, although it exists there too. So yeah, I think having a mastermind of people who have faced the same challenge as you face, done some of the same kind of things you're doing, and bring their experience to it, it's invaluable. One of the first things I did when I started writing crime novels, by the way, was there's a particular novelist, a British guy, lives in the UK, and he writes crime novels that I really admired, and his character is really unusual. She's psychologically damaged in a pretty profound way that I admired. And I wrote to him and told him how much I loved his stuff. And he wrote back, and we went back and forth, and we struck up a friendship. And it's just been hugely influential in my approach to the Finn books.
Yeah, that's really that's interesting, because I was explaining. It's hard to explain something like a mastermind, or it's hard to explain something like being a fiction writer, I imagine, or it's hard to explain these things. And I was having dinner with somebody last night, try to explain to him, he said, well, what are you going to do? Like, what's the job? Like, what's that look like? And so, Stu and I are very committed to this mastermind we're creating. And I'm like, hey man, this is going to be the thing. I'm kind of cutting all the other distractions out, and we're really focused on this thing. And when you start from the base of what is a mastermind, you're like, wow, man, I gotta, get beyond this. But I love how, I think as you hang out with people and as you surround yourself, be very intentional. And I love what you said, because this guy is writing books and is potentially famous and well known, but you took the action to reach out and write and say, hey, and that then resulted in some reciprocal, conversation, which turned to a friendship. And I think there's so much beauty in that as well. And it really helps to not only formulate what it is you want to be, what it is you're doing, what it even means to be this author, but now you're making these connections and growing these relationships simply based on the fact that you stepped out and did it, but two, you reached out and said, hey, I would really appreciate this. And I think there's so much power in that. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people see these journeys as independent journeys, these silos of effort, and they're just not that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a mastermind, sometimes I describe it as it's like a men's group. Now, the mastermind may not be all men. It may be a mix of men and women. It may be all kinds of people, but people can identify with it. You guys can identify with what a men's group is.
Yeah.
And a mastermind is kind of like that, only to the next level, because you're, like you say, typically you're around a certain either field or area or project, something that you're working with. And it could be, about profession, or it could be about your life. It's so enormously important. There's no books are written by no books are written by the solo iconoclastic hero in the turret of the castle, who's just scribbling away all by himself. It doesn't happen that way. I mean, I've got for Cold Fear, I had a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, three guys who I just corresponded with like crazy. I had the psychologist I know really, really well, who helped me form Finn's character. I had a woman who's native Icelander, that's for Cold Fear, native Icelander, who's lived in Iceland her whole life. She and I went back and forth like crazy. I mean, you come up with all these experts and people in these areas of expertise. They were my mastermind group for writing Cold Fear. In addition to Brandon, the fact that Brandon and I are the kernel at the heart of the book. I have that for every book. Every book I do, I reach out to people who have expertise and experience in certain areas, because in every book I do, there's something that's completely unfamiliar to me and foreign to me that I don't know anything about. So I like stepping into unfamiliar territory and exploring it like an ignoramus.
But I imagine, outside of helping inform your books, how do you think that experience and getting a glimpse of all those experts in their fields has substantially enriched your personal life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it's funny because I have a handful of people that we're not doing the same thing right now. They're not writers. I'm not the entrepreneur they are. Our projects don't overlap. And every now and then they do in certain skill sets, whether it's about video making or about something graphic or whatever. But mostly our projects don't overlap. We're just really good friends who have a history together. And we have a somewhat similar outlook on life. So I'll just connect and throw and share life experiences and life challenges, and they go back and forth. And it's like their expertise isn't why I reach out to them. I reach out to them just for their humanity and their experience. And it always sheds light on my life, sheds light on issues I face. And it's enriching as an experience. And that's kind of my private mastermind.
That's super cool. Well, we are excited about the release of Cold Fear. Comes out June 7th, correct?
It comes out June 7th. And you will be, unfortunately, still awake on June 9th, just like David was.
That's right.
You won't be able to put it down.
Won't be able to put it down. That's right. Well, we've already got an insider's glimpse in it, and we'll tell you that it's good. I promise you, it is good. So, yeah, this will come out prior to release, and so everyone, after you've listened to this, get ready for it and be ready to buy that on June 7th. What else? Anything else? Speaking of ignoramus, David, do you have anything else? Segue.
I'll give you the website for the book.
Please.
If you want to go see the website, which also has we got a speaking tour. We got actually a book tour coming up, which will start the day after the book releases, or actually the day the book releases. We're not going to 100 places. We're going to like 10 or 8, but we're last year with COVID raging, we didn't get to go anywhere really. So it's improving.
Yeah.
So the book, our book tour is on this site, and the book itself is on the site, and our videos of our podcast and speaking. So this podcast will be on that site.
Cool.
And that is simply coldfearthebook.com.
Okay.
coldfearthebook.com.
Can you make us a promise on your next book, your third book, you'll include Denver as a location for
there's a lot of readers here in Denver. Very I think this would be a good place to come and
it's in the harbor, man.
You could save on hotel fees, which is an extra penny, and we could hang out and we could break bread. That'd be awesome.
I'll tell you the truth. We're already looking at next year, because there's so many places that we want to go, just couldn't quite pull it off this year. But if this book tour does really well, and what that means is if people come to it, and people send their friends to it, who live in those areas where the tour is, and buy their books at those stores and support it. The more that happens, the better equipped we'll be to have them invite us back, and that'll encourage our publishers to support us to go to more places next year. And Denver is definitely on the candidate list.
Good. Yeah, no, this was great, John. It's always, I leave every one of our conversations, whether recorded or personal conversations, with a bunch of notes and thoughts and ideas. And I'll tell you, I honestly I was thinking through as you were talking, I feel a hunger to consume these, the idea of some other books that I haven't read. And then specifically the books that, right now being Cold Fear and I'm thinking of the line. It's funny because where I left off, and once we sign off, I don't want to ruin it for Stu, but where we left off is like this complete gripper. And I'm like, wait, what? And then I had to close it to come, do a podcast, which is great. But I'm extremely grateful for you and Anna, and just super excited for your continued success and these books that you're putting out. But also, for our audience, I would just encourage you to if you're kind of stuck in that nonfiction only mindset, open up a little bit and go get a fiction book. And a great place to start is Still Fear. And then June 7th, you'll be primed for Cold Fear. But I think it really does help. If you have a good story, it helps at whatever leadership position that you're in. If it's in a wardroom, if it's whatever the equivalent in the Army and the Air Force, the Marine Corps of a wardroom is. But if you're in that setting, or a mess, or whatever it is, or you're in industry and you're just we're all leaders in some capacity, I would encourage you just to explore the idea of fiction, like you said, good fiction, to not only enrich your thought process, but also potentially build empathy and ultimately leadership. And I think it's such an amazing tool, and it's enjoyable. I mean, it is really fun to read a really good. I lost the joy, a couple of years back I forgot the joy of reading a really good book that just forces you to stay up all night and turn pages. And this is that, right? This is another one. So congratulations to you and Brandon. And I look forward to what else you guys put out, because it's awesome stuff.
Hey man, thank you guys so much. Anna and I are rooting for you guys. We can't wait to watch you as your enterprise develops over the years.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, John. It's always a pleasure and an honor to have you on. Guys and gals, hey, get ready, go read the book. We'll post the website in the show notes. We'd love a 5-star review. Greatly appreciate that on iTunes or any podcast platform that you listen to. And most importantly, go fill your storehouse.
Make it a great day, friends. Thank you, John. Tell Anna hi and give her our love.
I'll do it.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Filling the Storehouse. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe and share it with someone you love. And if you really felt inspired, leave a 5-star review so we can continue to grow and help other Christian entrepreneurs fill their storehouse. If you're interested in creating financial freedom through real estate investing, be sure to check out our website at storehouse310turnkey.com. We'd love to serve you through our platform of building the kingdom. Just click on the contact link and we'll reply to you as soon as we can. Again, thanks so much for listening. Now go fill your storehouse and make it a great day.